Hey everybody, welcome to the live stream. Today you can see our freedom overview. Happy 4th of July, by the way. We are going to be talking about how you are indeed truly free, why freedom is expanding, how God gave us freedom, how to stay free through the Master's teachings and through quotes that I'm going to show you, the expansion of freedom throughout history and through the chakras, and expansion of freedom into the future as I see it. I'll be reading and responding to all chats as I do at all the live streams. So if you're joining us live, please say hi in the chat. I see Susan's in the chat. Hello. Welcome, Susan. All right, guys, I'm excited about this one. I've been working on it. This is a topic that I'm very passionate about. I feel like, as you'll see, I believe that this is the primary word that I would use to describe existence. We are designed by God to be free. And the United States, I believe, was founded, if we only had one word to describe it, it would be freedom. So, let's get into it. So if you were here last week, I wanted to play this for you. Well, I think it's a good idea. We'll start with the national anthem of the United States. As I heard it at the World Series of Poker, if you were here for last week's stream, you're going to enjoy this. Here's a video I took during the World Series of Poker. Whenever somebody wins a bracelet, they play the national anthem of the person who won the bracelet, who won the tournament at the World Series of Poker. So here it is.
To the Colossus. All right, all players should be headed back to their seats at this time.
All right, that was it. The national anthem of the United States. Let's see if we can get some music going here. I wish I could play some patriotic music, but I'm limited by what YouTube is going to let me play. So here we go. Here's my favorite songs off the YouTube playlist. All right, let's get into the presentation. I want to start with a quote from Jesus. From John 8:31 and 32, Jesus said, "If you hold to my teaching, you are really my disciples. Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." So, in this quote, Jesus is telling us that the truth sets you free. And so basically, the core of his teachings is to set you free. And that is what I plan to show you in this presentation. All right, first let's start with a definition of freedom. I believe in the long run, if humanity awakens properly, we will find that anything that is not a wrong is a right. No victim, no crime. I took this slide from Mark Passio. A living being or their property must have been harmed in order for a violation of natural law or a wrongdoing to have taken place. Any action which does not cause such harm is a right, which means that anything that is not a wrong is a right, and you have the freedom to do it. And ultimately, God has even given us the freedom to commit wrongdoings, which is quite incredible, right? If you do not have the freedom so even though you have the right to commit wrongs, I mean, you have the freedom to commit wrongs, it's not the right to commit wrongs, you do not have the freedom from consequences. And such a freedom would not be a part of existence. If you can imagine. So, as I say here, your imagination is the only place where you could commit a wrong and not have consequences. But your imagination is not really a part of existence. So if we do something in the real world, we have the freedom to do anything that our body, mind, or spirit can do, but we must experience the consequences, and that is kind of the limitation of our freedom. But it's not really a limitation; it's rather a part of the world that we exist in, which we would call natural law. So this point that I'm making is, if you did have freedom from consequence, you wouldn't be a part of existence because there would be nothing interacting with you. So the fact that we have consequences from our actions is because we exist, if that makes sense. I hope you understand that. So the idea is that the fact that there are consequences is not actually a limitation on your freedom. It's just a consequence of the fact that existence exists and that you are not the only thing in existence. Hey, Eleanor's here too. Welcome, Eleanor. So freedom is the core concept of existence. God created us with a fundamental freedom, free will. The only thing God does not have power over is our own free will. And this is what has created all of existence. So my understanding of the way that existence came into being is that God began creating spirits outside of himself, and he gave them free will. And the process of giving them free will created the expansion of the universe. It's a deep topic. I'm not going to try to get all the way into it, but that's the basic idea. And so as a result, God cannot force us to return to him or to love him. And so the trajectory of existence of an individual or of the universe itself is to either go further away from God or to get closer to God. And I believe that the journey of a soul is that it is given existence, it learns that it exists, it is separate from God in this way, and then eventually it gains consciousness and awareness of God and a desire to return to God. And that's what I think humanity is doing. So there's a couple quotes from the Bible that illustrate this. You may remember the Genesis story where God basically gives Adam and Eve the choice to eat of the tree of knowledge. But also there's this quote, Galatians 5:13. You, my brothers and sisters, were called to be free, but do not use your freedom to indulge the flesh. Rather, serve one humbly in love. Serve one another humbly in love. That is the way of service, right? And that's what I talk about on this channel. You know, the world has been engaged in the way of the ego, which is the opposite of the way of service, for a very long time. We'll talk about that also. Kind of the trajectory of history has carried us from this selfish, materialistic, non-spiritually based existence towards a more spiritually based existence. And this quote describes that perfectly. You are free, but use your freedom to serve spirit, to serve God, and not to serve the flesh. And I believe also that we can kind of do both. We can have material abundance, and we can reach all of our goals. We can become wealthy. We can, have great impacts on the world, and still be serving spirit. And I think that's the new age that we're entering into. It wouldn't be a 4th of July if I didn't talk about the founding fathers. Thomas Jefferson said, the God who gave us life gave us liberty at the same time. So that's the same idea. And the founding fathers believed this very strongly. You will find this in the documents, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, that freedom and the rights that they enumerate in the Bill of Rights and the Constitution and in the Declaration of Independence are God-given rights. That is the idea. They are given by God. They're not given by a monarch. They're not given by a ruler. They're not claimed by individuals. They are given to us inherently as part of our being. It is part of our being that we are free. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about this paradox of freedom before we get more into the fact that freedom is real, that we are free, because I'm sure a lot of people feel sometimes that they aren't free. So, but if you really think about it, we do have absolute freedom in mind, body, and spirit. But what obstacles exist? There are obstacles to our freedom, but those are not permanent obstacles, and we can overcome the obstacles that exist. I heard a great story on a spiritual podcast about a person in prison. And even the person in prison, right, though they are bound by perhaps chains or, they're locked in a cell, they still have control over their own body. They have the ability to move their body. They have the ability to not move their body. And that is entirely up to them, right? Same with their mind. They have freedom within their mind. They can still use their imagination. They can think about things. They can meditate. And they have freedom in spirit, which is because they have access to God. They actually could reach enlightenment. And I believe a lot of people actually have reached enlightenment in prison. So I wanted to tell you this story that I heard. An individual was ended up incarcerated in jail. And I think, you'll hear from the story that he was actually innocent he was innocent. So, but he was in jail. And so he was praying and visualizing the way that, you would try to manifest and asking God over and over and over with deep earnestness, a deep passion and desire to be free from prison. And what ended up happening was the police, which they never do, they reopened his evidence file and they tested the cocaine, the powder that he was arrested with, and they found that it was actually fake. And because they discovered that it was fake, he was exonerated of the charges and released from prison. So this story kind of shows you that even when you're in prison, what seems like an insurmountable obstacle, getting out of prison, may be accessible, or is accessible through earnest prayer and earnest desire, the divine will. We'll talk about that a little later. Basically, anything is possible. Anything is within our grasp because we do have ultimate freedom. But it just takes time. Sometimes we have to get through obstacles. Sometimes we have to get through our own problems, and that's one of the things I forgot to mention that earlier. I think that's the biggest thing. The only thing that's holding you back, the only thing that's preventing you from being truly free is yourself. It's the things, the limiting beliefs that you've accepted, your fears and your desires. We'll talk about that a little later. So the lesson here again, all obstacles can be overcome by divine will. Also, the evolution of civilization appears to be removing obstacles from freedom. And we're going to talk about that. Over time, when we look back in history, especially recent history in the last, 2,000 years basically, humanity has been progressively becoming more and more free. But we are still bound to God and to natural law as a part of existence, because this is how existence works. And I don't think we would want to exist in an existence that didn't have any natural law. We wouldn't survive long, and it wouldn't really work. I wanted to read you this passage from the Wahoo Ching, number 40. He talks about the natural law, and this is what we've been talking about. The natural laws of the universe are inviolable. Energy condenses into substance. Food is eaten through the mouth and not the nose. A person who neglects to breathe will turn blue and die. Some things simply can't be dismissed. So here he's explaining that yes, there are natural laws that kind of bind us. It is also part of the cosmic law that what you say and do determines what happens in your life. That is, we are not exempt from consequences. The ordinary person thinks that this law is external to himself, and he feels confined and controlled by it. This is a very powerful statement that speaks directly to our experiences of the world. Many people feel that they are limited by what the world allows them to do. But really what they're limited by is the natural consequences of free will. It's kind of like a paradox, but it all works together, and ultimately, if you keep driving with your will, you can get to what you want. So the ordinary person thinks that this law is external to himself, and he feels confined and controlled by it. So his desires trouble his mind. His mind troubles his spirit, and he lives in constant turmoil with himself and the world. His whole life is spent in struggling. But the superior person recognizes that he and the subtle law are one, right? The very fact that we have freedom is why the law exists. The fact that we are part of existence and one with God is why we are bound to this law. Therefore, he cultivates himself to accord with it, bringing moderation to his actions and clarity to his mind. Doing this, he finds himself at one with all that is divine and enlightened. His days are passed drinking in serenity and breathing out contentment. This is the profound and simple truth. You are the master of your life and death. What you do is what you are. So I feel that this statement or this passage really describes the nature of freedom. You are the master of your life and death. What you do is what you are. That is why, as he says here, what you say and do determines what happens in your life. So the consequences that we experience are a part of the freedom that we have, right? So if we have total freedom, we also have total responsibility for our own lives. And so only you can limit your freedom. Ultimately, all consequences can be overcome. Because we are infinite spirits, we are immortal spirits, we have infinite time to overcome the consequences of our actions. Even if we do the most horrendous wrong, God still loves us, and our existence continues, and we can right those wrongs and escape the consequences. The greater the wrong, the longer it probably takes to overcome the consequences. But all obstacles are temporary. However, one of the greatest obstacles, and you could even say that any obstacle, is ultimately self-imposed. We impose upon ourselves the limitations of our own freedom. This can be called karma. It is caused by fear and doubt, which are caused by delusion and ignorance of the truth, and also caused by desire. Desire is one of the main reasons that we may pursue things that are not in alignment with God or with the truth or with the good. And this is why we end up with negative consequences on occasion. But you have to understand that these are all self-imposed. This slide is from Mark Passio, and this shows the two paths that a spirit may take. And you can see at the bottom there we have freedom or control, right? So the opposite of freedom is being controlled. So if you follow the path of fear, you will end up ignorant, the refusal of the truth, and you will be in a state of confusion. And then you will be controlled by everything around you, like your desires and by your delusions, which results in chaos. But if you follow the path of love, the truth, you will gain knowledge, which is acceptance of the truth through love. You'll gain sovereignty or a rulership of yourself, and then you will be truly free. And so one of the main things that prevent us from being free is delusion. That is why in the world we are constantly assaulted by methods of fooling us into being controlled by someone else. That is one of the negative aspects of the world that we live in today. And I feel that it's falling away, but I think it's going to take probably another 1,000 to 2,000 years based on some of the theory I'm going to show you here for it to totally fall away. But at any time, we as individuals have the ability to choose either the path of love or the path of fear. Hey, Eleanor has a chat here. As I said, I'll be responding, reading all chats and responding. Eleanor says, Sylvia and I talked about that yesterday, that her being in charge of her own body increases as her ability to make right decisions for herself increases. Right, yes. Yeah, so as she becomes more free, more autonomous, she is more responsible for herself. It was cool talking about that with a 5-year-old because it was so simple. So in the way I talk to my child is like a tiny allegory of how maybe God sees us having freedom and responsibility. Yeah, exactly, Eleanor. Yes, I think that the parent-child relationship is mirrored by our relationship with God. And so God can see us working to gain more and more freedom. And he says to us, if you want more freedom, you're going to need to take more responsibility. And I think that's a big part of the way of service. That's why I think that everyone should be following the way of service, because that is the way that you actually do increase your freedom. And it sounds paradoxical because you would think, oh, I have to serve others, so that makes me less free. No. And especially because of the way life works, you get to serve others in the most ecstatic and joyful way for yourself. You can choose how to serve others. You can choose when to serve others. You can withdraw and you can, relax if you need to. There's a lot of freedom involved in the way of service. But that is the way to gain more and more freedom, more and more influence on the world to reach your desires that we mentioned earlier. The fulfillment of desires is also a way to be free. This is another slide from Mark Passio, and it's called the Law of Freedom. At the bottom there, you can see there's an equation. The sum total of freedom is proportional to the sum total of morality. The natural law of freedom has a quantifiable effect. Aggregate or sum total of freedom is directly proportional to the aggregate or sum total of morality. Consequences will be manifested into the human condition as a direct result of the moral quality of aggregate human behavior. We collectively reap the result of the behavior that we collectively sow. Thomas Jefferson also understood this. He said, only a virtuous people are capable of freedom. As nations become corrupt and vicious, they have more need of masters. And so this is one of the great struggles that we see today. Is, are people going to be more moral and therefore more free? Which is what we all want, right? Again, freedom leads to order, which is the manifested good. Whereas non-freedom, control, leads to chaos. But if we are not a moral people, if people do not take responsibility, if they do not follow the way of service, and instead follow the way of the ego, serving only themselves at the expense of others, then they will ultimately have a need for masters. They have a need to have their freedom reduced. And I think we have seen that in the past. If you look deep into the past, there was less understanding of what it meant to be a good person. I think today, now, there is no excuse for not being a good person because all the information is available. But there is also a lot of delusion and disinformation out there too. So that's also causing issues, and that's why I've started this channel, to try to help people not be deluded. So as I said earlier, I believe that the one word that defines the United States is freedom, or at least the founding of the nation was based on the word freedom. Independence Day that we celebrate today is literally becoming separate and free from the British Empire, free from the master, the king in Great Britain. And the U.S. was founded with the Bill of Rights and the Declaration of Independence, which guaranteed life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And what we are seeing in the world, I believe, is the victory of this U.S. culture, the spreading of the U.S. culture. And I think it'll be useful to jump ahead for a second here and read this Washington quote. George Washington said, "Liberty, when it begins to take root, is a plant of rapid growth." And this is what I mean by the U.S. culture is spreading. And if you look at from the beginning of the founding of the United States, the rest of the world has looked more and more like the United States, for better or worse, right? And I think for better on this idea of freedom. We're coming to the point where nations that don't allow freedom kind of look ridiculous. They kind of look stupid, in my opinion. You know, what are our impressions of North Korea? Or our impressions of China with, you know, a lot of the restrictions that they put on their people? And naturally, everyone gravitates towards freedom, right? This is why the United States enjoyed such a golden age. All these people wanted to come to the United States to experience this freedom. My mom actually told me some stories of her traveling in her youth. And, you know, this was like 30, 40 years ago. She's traveling through Hungary when it was still part of the USSR, the Soviet Union. And everywhere she turned, there were men with machine guns. The same thing in Cuba. Men with machine guns. Showing you are not free, right? Showing you better not do this or that. And it really struck her how different it was from the United States. And again, I feel like that tells us again, it shows us how and why the culture of the U.S. has spread. And in particular, this idea of freedom has spread. And there's been obviously ups and downs. It's not a straight line. But over time, it has spread. And I'm going to show you more specifically what I've seen. The trajectory of freedom is expanding, and it actually follows the chakras, right? And Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You have to start at the bottom, right? The first chakra, very, survival, freedom to live, as is said, life, but also the pursuit of happiness, which is kind of the higher chakras. And we're going to talk more about this. Despite what you see from the media, which is, I think, trying to delude people into thinking that they are still being controlled. But I think as time goes on, more and more, it is harder and harder to control people and to limit their freedom. So this also follows the 24,000-year Yuga cycle. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. First, I want to go through kind of the chronology, right? So the first chakra, we can discuss the first time that like rights were enshrined into law was in the Magna Carta in 1215. And in the Magna Carta it said, "No free man shall be deprived of his standing in any other way, nor will we proceed with force against him, except by the lawful judgment of his equals or by the law of the land." So the idea is that no longer could free men be suddenly imprisoned by the king without a lawful process, a judgment of his equals, which is a trial by jury. And so in the Magna Carta, that was the first step, the first chakra, which is connected to your very right to survive, your very right to exist and be free. That happened in 1215. And then, it took a long time, and that was only applied to landholders, noblemen. 10% of the population is what the Magna Carta applied to. But as time went on, now we get to 1700, and you get to the second chakra. This is your choice of mate. And in the past, marriages were arranged. There was no love-based marriages. There was no choosing of a mate. But in the 1700s and the 1800s, this began to change. I'll read you a little synopsis here. The shift from arranged marriages to marriages based on love and personal choice happened gradually over several centuries, with key developments occurring between the 17th and 19th centuries in the Western societies. In the 1700s, it marks a turning point. Enlightenment philosophers like John Locke emphasized individual rights and personal happiness, which began influencing ideas about marriage. The concept that individuals should have a say in their life partners gained philosophical backing during this period. The 18th century saw the emergence of companionate marriage, the idea that spouses should be friends and companions who choose each other based on mutual affection and compatibility, not just family arrangements. This was partially influenced by Protestant reforms that emphasized the emotional and spiritual bonds between spouses. The 18th century is the 1700s. So basically in the 1700s, we had the second chakra being freed. The right to choose a mate, the right to have some creative choice in your life. And often the second chakra is described as being linked to the genitals or the reproductive function of individuals. This also, you begin to see more emotional freedom, and you can have that, you see that in the pursuit of happiness, right? Each individual has their right to pursue what it is that makes them happy, what is their creative desires. And this leads us into the third chakra, the freedom of will. Often the third chakra is related to your profession. And I liken this to the period of the golden age of the United States, or at least the beginning of it, the immigration boom that happened in the late 1800s. It was during this period that people were realizing that they could go to the United States and pursue their own professional goals in a far greater way than they could ever do anywhere else in the world. So you can see the progression here. 1215, the first chakra, 1700s to 1800s, the second chakra, late 1800s, the third chakra. And now the fourth chakra, the heart chakra. Freedom of love, love-based marriage, as we mentioned earlier, freedom of religion, all of these freedoms that are based on, what is the desire of your heart. But what I really realize is that the heart chakra is about giving and expanding love. And so as we saw in the early 1900s, these rights and freedoms began to be given to all peoples, not just white males in the USA, but also to women, to immigrants, and to more peoples on the planet. And I believe that that's a continuous expansion. And most people agree that these freedoms should be expanded throughout the world. And I see that they are, in my opinion. Like I said, it's not a straight line, right? It's not perfectly going up all the time. So that's the early 1900s. And then the fifth chakra is the throat chakra. It's about freedom of speech, very clearly. It was codified in the 1791 Bill of Rights. But the true expansion of our freedom of speech has come from the expansion in people's ability to tolerate, or not even tolerate, but openness to new ideas. And as time has gone on, I believe this has happened, the fourth chakra in the early 1900s, this chakra more in the late 1900s, when more and more people, more and more ideas were able to be circulated, and freedom of speech, while politically had been the truth, in a true societal, or the effects of it, in practice, freedom of speech doesn't mean much if you're still afraid to speak because you're going to be ostracized. Even if you do have the freedom politically, you're not going to be put in jail. But as time has gone on, freedom of speech has continued to expand to the point today where it has expanded so much that almost anyone can say whatever they want on the internet, right? And now everyone has a platform. I have this platform to do my freedom of speech, to talk about what I think is interesting. And I think that is increasing and expanding the freedom of everyone. Which also leads into the sixth chakra, which is freedom of knowledge. The information age. This is part of the expansion of freedom of speech, because everyone is able to share ideas more and more widely, now we're getting to the freedom of the sixth chakra, where in the information age, there is abundant information everywhere. And Mark Passio actually argues that we have gone through the apocalypse, because the apocalypse means to take away from, apo, the Greek prefix apo, away from or remove from, and the Greek verb kalyptine, to cover or conceal. And so apocalypse means to reveal or to take out of hiding. And so knowledge has been taken out of hiding, and now we live in the post-apocalyptic age. I believe that's true. The creation of the internet, as I said here, from 2000 to 2012, basically, and a lot of people see 2012, a lot of people thought that the world was going to end, but I think 2012 was probably a turning point for the internet, when enough people in the world had access to the internet, and the internet had grown enough that we could truly say that knowledge had been revealed. And so this leads us to the seventh chakra, the freedom of divinity. And I think that this is what is emerging now. This is yet to come and is coming. It is part of the way of service, the new age, as I spoke about with Yogananda, his vision for the new age, and really the freedom to know that you are a child of God. And not just, that just Jesus was a child of God, but that you are a child of God, and that you are a divine person, and you are a divine spirit. So this one is a little less defined. I'm not totally sure about it, and that's because I don't think that it's totally come into fruition yet. We're kind of still in the sixth chakra. So we'll see how the seventh chakra plays into all this. So I mentioned how this follows the 24,000-year Yuga cycle. The Yuga cycle is delineated in Hindu teaching, and the guru of Paramahansa Yogananda, Surya Yukteswar, you can see him here. Let's get a little bigger, zoom in on him. There we go. Surya Yukteswar. He described the ancient Yuga system in his book in 1894. And he actually explained that we are exiting the Kali Yuga, you can see here, in 1900. The Kali Yuga being the material age, the dark age. And we are entering the Dwapara Yuga, which is the energy age. And remarkably, in 1910, Einstein established the equation E equals mc squared. And he established that the material world is actually made of energy. And so this Yuga cycle is basically the status of humanity's consciousness. So in the Kali Yuga, which is where we were from, as he says, he argues from 700 BC or 900 BC. I think it varies, but I believe it's 700 BC to about 1900 AD. We're in the material age without awareness of energy, vibration, some of the more spiritual nature of the world. And that comes into Dwapara Yuga. And then the Treta Yuga and the Satya Yuga are the even higher levels where we understand not just energy, but also the mental power of energy, the magnetism of energy, and finally, the oneness with God in the spiritual age. And these are the Iron Age, the Dark and Iron Age is the Kali Yuga, the Dwapara Yuga is the Bronze Age, the Treta Yuga is the Silver Age and the Mental Age, and then the Satya Yuga is the Spiritual Age or the Golden Age, with widespread enlightenment, where being an enlightened being is going to be as common as knowing that 2 + 2 = 4 today, right? This cycle kind of describes what I think a lot of people, especially my viewers, I think, might understand or believe, that there were ancient civilizations that we don't really know about or aren't admitted to, that were more advanced. For example, we don't have an explanation of how the pyramids were built. Just as a simple example. And so what happened in the past, as you can see in this chart, going back to 11,500 BC in the center of the Satya Yuga, that's when everything began to descend. As it says here, was there an asteroid explosion over Canada? There was the Ice Age. Perhaps Atlantis fell around this time. And then there was this long descent down from this golden Satya age down into the Silver and then Bronze Age. And it's funny how the Bronze Age is actually directly correlates with what the history textbooks talk about. This is the Bronze Age, even in history textbooks, 3100 BC until 700 BC. And during this time, there was a great deal of war and I guess basically a descent into the Kali Yuga, the Dark Age, which again is in the textbooks in AD 500 to about 1500 AD, is called the Dark Ages, at least in Europe. And it saw, the collapse of the Roman Empire in a more civilized time descend into a more uncivilized time of warfare. But even in this dark Kali Yuga, we had Jesus Christ, we had Lao Tzu, we had Confucius and Buddha, Aristotle. So it shows that even in the darkest times, there are ascended masters that come to speak to humanity. But I don't think anyone could argue that this was not the period of materialism. So this model shows us that we are now ascending into a golden age in the next, 10,000 years or whatever it is. But we are right now emerging as is. So I know it says 1700 here, but I think that arrow is actually a little bit further back. So it's 1900, he says, was the end of the Kali Yuga. And he says that there's a 100 to 200 year transition period. And I feel that we're experiencing that transition from a material age to the energy age. And I anticipate it greatly. So we have seen this through the expansion of technology. If you look back on technology, you can see how it follows the same progression and the same chakra system. The agricultural revolution freed us from basically being stuck in survival, and it created civilization and specialization, which is the second and third chakras. And then the Industrial Revolution, a few thousand years later, freed us from manual labor, and that was the Industrial Revolution was kind of the beginning of the end of the Kali Yuga. 1700 can be thought of as the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. And this was when humanity first started to learn and realize that they could use energy to escape this dependence on the material world. Now we're moving into the Information Revolution, which freed us from information scarcity and having knowledge democracy, which means everyone has knowledge. So moving from not just being free from the material needs, but also being free from ignorance and, as I showed earlier, moving and ascending up through the chakras. And finally, the AI revolution, I think we're experiencing as well, freeing us from repetitive work, even in the knowledge world, freeing us from, having to research the same things or apply the same knowledge over and over, freeing us from these repetitive tasks, allowing us to be more fully human. I have a video about that, about AI and how AI is making us more human, because we have to focus on the things that make us human, the things that really matter to us on a spirit level, which is what AI cannot do for us. All right, some chats from Eleanor, who also happens to be the only viewer right now. It is 4th of July. I guess everybody's out celebrating. That's all right. Eleanor says, wow, well, if we are already seeing the shift towards a spiritual age and it's only the very beginning of the yellow age, that's really encouraging. Exactly. Yeah, and I think, if you read the autobiography of a yogi and you learn the story, Sri Yukteswar was visited by Babaji, who they say, and I believe is true, he's immortal living in the Himalayas, an avatar who trains disciples. He was told to write this story, and he wrote about how we were entering this energy age 10 years before Einstein's work was published, which is a very powerful, proof that Utesquar was tapping into the truth, because he was proven right only 10 years later, and he said everything is energy before Einstein proved it scientifically. Eleanor says, it seems like things are shifting fast, so it would follow that the end of the yellow and into the red ages would be even more awesome than we can imagine. Becoming more happen? I'm not sure what you mean. Oh, becoming more human. There are some people who seem to think being human means, I guess, you didn't get to finish that thought. That's all right. Yeah, I mean, and this is actually in the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna said, in 5,000 years, the earth will be a paradise. And he said that around 3000 BC. So he said that about 5,000 years ago. So give or take a few hundred years or whatever it is, I think we are leading into a time when we will be living in a paradise. And I hope and I expect, or I guess I believe, that the way of service, that's why I've created the way of service, as part of this transition, that we can transition into this higher state of being, this freedom from material desires and needs and wants, into a energetic, more spiritual age through becoming more evolved beings. That's part of the process. And so we have to embrace the way of service, embrace a spiritual existence to be a part of this leading edge wave into the higher age. And if you don't do it, you might be, lagging behind. Eleanor's finished her thought. There are some people who seem to think being human means doing the kind of work that machines can do now. I'm thinking of the Amish who bale hay by hand when tractors do the labor so fast. No offense to the Amish, I just don't understand, I guess. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think this has been part of my spiritual journey, is just to embrace everything about our world and our existence. And instead of thinking, we need to go back to cutting and baling hay by hand because technology is bad, it's like, no, technology is here. It's part of God. It's part of the real world. And it serves a great purpose. If you look at it from these angles, if you understand the trajectory of humanity and of civilization, you can see that this is God's will. Now, that doesn't mean that it doesn't have its negative aspects and that we shouldn't be careful, and that the Amish don't have some things to teach us, because the Amish have kind of preserved a lot of morals, a lot of ways of looking at the world that I think are valuable, right? Every culture has value, even those who reject technology. But hopefully in the future, they can accept technology and also maintain those values, right? So let's get into what might be the most important thing for you viewers, is how to maintain freedom. I talked about this in my elements video. The air element is the element of freedom. You think about the wind, it answers to no one. It freely traverses through all obstacles. Air is the element of freedom. And in that video, I talked about clearing the air. So you can be more free by clearing the air. The phrase clearing the air is to remove the baggage that might be between you and others. Agreements that you may no longer want to be a part of, problems that you might have created, misunderstandings that you have with other people. If you can clear the air, you will find yourself unburdened and more free. So how do we do this? We be impeccable with our word. And also we follow, if you watched our Lao Tzu video that we did a few weeks ago, Lao Tzu said, I have only 3 things to teach you: simplicity, compassion, patience. Lao Tzu also said, manifest plainness, embrace simplicity, reduce selfishness, have few desires. I was reading some Yogananda earlier, and he says, before you try to get what you want, make sure that you have what you need. And if you just focus on your needs, you will find that that is enough. And if you can simplify your life, you will be free from these desires. Desires can be very freedom reducing, honestly. So that means following the way of service and not the path of woe. That's what WS and WE stand for. Also, following the truth and not being deluded. Always seeking the truth and not being afraid of the truth and not holding on to delusions. So many people hold on to their delusions. That will prevent you from being free, because now you are beholden to the delusion instead of the truth, which, as Jesus said, the truth will set you free. And finally, I want to talk about divine will. If you focus on your goal, you will reach it. Never give up. I watched a great talk by Ananda Moy. We watched some Ananda Moy the other day, and I have a great clip for you guys. I'm going to play for it right now. All right. Here we go. The title of this talk is called Dynamic Will Can Change Your Life. And this is the end of it, so we'll just listen to the very end. I'll turn off the music for this.
There was a woman saint in Italy. At the age of 6, she took a vow, just on her own, to dedicate her life to God. How did that happen? How did Mozart start to create music, write music, compose music at the age of 4? How? Well, if it doesn't manifest in this life, next life, nothing, no effort is lost. We are taking those tendencies over into our next incarnation. Now, people say, well, in this instant satisfaction society in which we live, we want everything now, isn't it? Right now. And if it doesn't come right now, what's the use? No, we have to understand those great, deep laws and apply them. Apply them in anything. Be it spirituality or in sports or health or whatever. There are lots of stories of people who had tremendous, tremendous handicaps. And just because of those handicaps, they took that not as a restriction, but as an incentive, as a challenge. And they used that in any form, whatever it is, developing that power within. And it all contributes. I often think when the Olympics come around and I see how those people, that tremendous concentration, that tremendous determination to win that gold medal, I think it's wonderful. I think it's wonderful. Just remember this. You're a child of God, and you do not know what power is within you. It is the omnipotence of God that is within you, inherent. It's there. And all you have to do is think about, what is my life? Where am I going? Am I successful? And take those basic things that you want to accomplish. Don't have too many, otherwise you're splitting it all up. Just a few. In your physical life, in our material life, outside, certainly we have to play our role as best as we can. We have to live so that we are more or less healthy. And we should not neglect our spiritual striving. That's the first, that's the supreme goal, oneness with God. So, when you think in your meditations or techniques that you are not very successful, that same law applies. That same power is there. And all of a sudden, gradually, you'll have a breakthrough. and then another one, and then another one. And it works. It's a law of God.
There you have it. It's hard to follow up on Andamoy's words. Something that really struck me there is he said, no effort is lost. If not in this incarnation, then the next. You know, when we run into obstacles to our dreams, the things that we're seeking, we have to remember that we are building our karma. We are an eternal being. This is a part of our spirit. God remembers it. We will remember it in the next life. I think of the Gladiator line. He says, I will have my vengeance in this life or the next. Now, I don't know about vengeance, but, you know, whatever it is that you want to accomplish, if you pursue it single-mindedly with that kind of mindset, I will have this in this life or the next, then you are following divine will, which is impossible to fail. I wanted to share with you guys my experience of finding freedom through Taoism. One of the tenets of Taoism is complete acceptance. To truly let go of all judgments and attachments. I've been thinking about this lately because I've been, reading the work of Paramahansa Yogananda. I'm becoming closer to God and the avatars. You don't know what an avatar is. It's the name for beings like Jesus, Buddha, Krishna, and perhaps other great saints. Some people believe that Paramahansa was an avatar. In other religions, I believe there were probably other avatars. So basically, these are living beings that embody God. And so many people who follow Jesus, I believe Jesus is probably the most famous avatar, the most well-known. And so when we focus on Jesus, we are also focusing on God. But this clashed with my idea of Taoism. Taoism kind of says there is no God to worship. And I realized that it wasn't that one was right and the other was wrong, but that I could integrate the two. To me, the Tao is always present, and it doesn't require an attunement to a particular avatar. Sometimes it's hard to feel God's presence. Sometimes it's hard to feel connected to Jesus in a particular moment. And this may be different for everyone. But to me, the Tao is easy to be connected to because it is so pervasive. It is so always present. And I realized that the Tao is like a non-personified avatar that is integrated into all reality. It's like a word for the presence of God in everything. And so my experience of that has given me great freedom. And I want to share that with you. There's no need to align yourself with a particular avatar or a particular way of thinking about life. In fact, Taoism says that you should let go of all those things and simply relax into your inherent freedom, your inherent connection to God and to the Tao and to all that is. I want to read a couple quotes from the Wahoo Ching that I believe illustrate this very well. Why scurry about looking for the truth? It vibrates in everything and every not thing, right off the tip of your nose. Can you be still and see it in the mountain, the pine tree, yourself? The Tao doesn't come and go. It is always present everywhere, just like the sky. If your mind is clouded, you won't see it. But that doesn't mean it isn't there. All misery is created by the activity of the mind. Can you let go of words and ideas, attitudes and expectations? If so, then the Tao will loom into view. Can you be still and look inside? If so, then you will see that the truth is always available, always responsive. It's very powerful. And I can feel it now. Like I feel the Tao now. When I remember this, I can feel it even with the bright light shining on me. And while I'm doing a live stream, it's like the isness, the very essence of existence. And it is freeing to not feel that you have to be a certain way or think a certain way in order to feel this connection to God and to the Tao. Stoicism, explained by Marcus Aurelius, is another freedom-based philosophy. Stoicism is based on the idea that you have absolute control over your own response to the things that you worry about in the world. Marcus Aurelius explains, if you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. And this you have the power to revoke at any moment. It's a statement of freedom. The happiness of those who want to be popular depends on others. The happiness of those who seek pleasure fluctuates with moods outside of their control. But the happiness of the wise grows out of their own free acts. Again, your exercising of freedom is the source of your happiness. You always own the option of having no opinion. There is never any need to get worked up or to trouble your soul about things you can't control. You have the freedom to not care about someone else's opinion or about what's going on in the news or about whatever the thing that is troubling you, the gossips and rumors in your social circle. You always own the option of having no opinion. Lao Tzu also spoke on government, and his ideal government was basically no government, or a very limited government. When the master governs, the people are hardly aware that he exists. Next best is a leader who is loved. Next, one who is feared. The worst is one who is despised. If you don't trust the people, you make them untrustworthy. The master doesn't talk. He acts. When his work is done, the people say, "Amazing. We did it all by ourselves." For governing a country well, there is nothing better than moderation. The mark of a moderate man is freedom from his own ideas, tolerant like the sky, all-pervading like sunlight, firm like a mountain, supple like a tree in the wind. He has no destination in view and makes use of anything life happens to bring his way. Nothing is impossible for him. Because he has let go, he can care for the people's welfare as a mother cares for her child. And finally, I want to leave you guys with quotes from the founding fathers on the idea of freedom. Thomas Jefferson said, "I prefer dangerous freedom over peaceful slavery." Benjamin Franklin said, "Without freedom of thought, there can be no such thing as wisdom." That quote reminds me of the freedom through the sixth chakra. George Washington said, "If freedom of speech is taken away, then dumb and silent we may be led, like sheep to the slaughter." The importance of freedom of speech, of clearing the air, of speaking the truth. And finally, Patrick Henry said, "Give me liberty or give me death." And if you have an understanding of death as a transition to the next life, then it makes sense to never let your own freedom be limited by fear of death, and rather to be free. Give me liberty or give me death. All right, that's my presentation for today, everyone. Oh, we do have 2 viewers now. Say hi in the chat. We're about done here, but these are the quotes. Happy 4th of July. Eleanor says, cool idea, non-personified avatar. Yeah, I came up with that as I was doing this presentation. So even if just you and me, Eleanor, see this presentation, at least it benefited us, right? So happy 4th of July, everyone. Happy 4th of July. I'm here every Friday at 3 p.m. live for Way of Service. Give me liberty or give me death.